Puddly puddly pum, The Archers. Why am I singing that? Because a number of people asked me if I can comment on the sentencing of George Grundy. And yes, I can. And it also gives me an opportunity to talk about accuracy of portrayals of the legal proceedings in the media, and also about consecutive versus concurrent sentences. Now, the first thing I should perhaps confess is I've not listened to The Archers in decades, but some wonderful people on the All About The Archers YouTube channel. Luckily, they did a really good video explaining what had happened. So I'll explain the narrative actually in the episode, and then just comment about how accurate it is. And actually, I'm very impressed actually with how accurate it is, apart from one major detail. So, first of all, what actually happened in the series? Well, a young man called George Grundy, a 19-year-old man, was walking home one night, saw one of his neighbours drunk and passed out in her car, decided to be a good neighbour and drive her home. Unfortunately, when he was driving home, he appeared to have caused an accident, and somebody swerved off the road and went into a lake. He did a heroic rescue, actually, and rescued the other people. But then before the police turned up, he shoved his unconscious and drunk neighbour into the driving seat. So when the police arrived, they just assumed she had been the driver, and he claimed he'd just been sort of walking past in the area. After much soul searching and telling his parents, he eventually came clean at the magistrate's court and he confessed to everything. So he was convicted of dangerous driving and attempting to pervert the course of justice. And he received 1 year for the dangerous driving and 2 years for the attempt to pervert the course of justice, but to be served concurrently, in other words, at the same time. So it's a 2-year sentence, of which in real life he would serve no more than half of that. So how accurate actually is that? Well, first of all, you can tell that they definitely did consult people, because there's one little bit I noticed in the episode where somebody refers to a victim impact statement and then says, oh, sorry, my personal statement, because they actually have changed the name now, so presumably somebody's tipped them off and said that's the sort of thing somebody might be advised about. But are the charges correct? Certainly if he said, yes, I caused the accident, that could amount to dangerous driving. Dangerous driving is when your driving falls far below the standard expected of a reasonable and competent driver, as opposed to careless driving, which is it falls below the standard. Although there's also an element of careless driving is something you do, recklessly. It's something, it's a lack of attention or things like that, whereas dangerous driving is more of a conscious choice. I'm going to drive too fast in these road conditions, I am going to attempt to overtake on a blind bend or something like that. Arguably could have also been done for TWOC, taking without consent, because obviously he did not have the consent of the person who owned the car to drive it. Although I suppose it might have been, well, your neighbour would have let you do that anyway. I mean, I must confess, when I used to live on a farm, we were always just borrowing each other's vehicles all the time. So maybe, a simple tale of everyday country folk, maybe that's why they didn't go with that. And also, a lot of the time, unlike in the US, where they just stick every single conceivable offence on the indictment and then say, right, we'll start doing some pleas. Over here, the CPS are told, just stick things on that reflect the actual conduct. You don't need to go overboard on this, especially when considering if somebody's going to plead guilty to this and the potential sentencing. So you don't need to throw the kitchen sink. But what about the sentences? Well, the sentence for dangerous driving, that's well within the sentencing guidelines, not least because somebody was put at risk. It was very serious. Somebody ended the car, in a lake. Now, luckily, they were rescued apparently with no sort of long-term effects. But obviously, that would be something that would cross the custody threshold. Because you can get done for dangerous driving, even if nobody is affected by your dangerous driving. Because, as I keep saying, in England and Wales, we tend to sentence based on culpability, not consequences. It's what are your voluntary actions? That's the thing that's within your control. So that's what we sentence you on, not so much with actually the consequences. Although interestingly, they did introduce the offence of death by careless driving, which goes very much against that principle, just because of the public outcry that, well, hang on, somebody's died here. you can't just give them 3 points on their licence. But it used to be, if you caused death by careless driving, you were prosecuted for careless driving, and the prosecution weren't allowed to mention that somebody died in case it prejudiced the bench. But now we have a departure from that with death by careless and death by dangerous driving. But in this case, he got 1 year for dangerous driving. That's very much within the sentencing guidelines. Also, he will be required to take an extended retake if he wants his licence back. There will have been a disqualification. I couldn't find out what that was, but for dangerous driving, it's usually at least 3 years. But also, like I said, before you get your licence back, you have to take the extended retest. So you start from scratch, you do the theory test, and then you do the driving test. The extended retest is where they keep you out for like 15 minutes longer, just to make sure you are absolutely safe. What about the perverting the course of justice charge? Well, yeah, that is... because he was effectively not just trying to wriggle out of himself, he was trying to frame an innocent person. Yeah, that is, again, within the sentencing guidelines. So 2 years is pretty much, on the mark for that, because, he's got his guilty plea, so he's got his 1/3 off. Because, courts take perverting the course of justice very, very seriously, because it undermines the entire legal system. Even things like just agreeing to take somebody's points for them can get you 6 months. So something like that, that's all voluntary. It's like, okay, my license is fairly clean, I'll say I was driving. If they find out, you'll get 6 months inside. So where you have actually tried to fit up an innocent person, then yeah, they're going to throw the book at you. So taking into account his early guilty pleas. One thing I did like, actually, is how long this storyline ran. Now, no doubt that's great for the producers of The Archers, keep people intrigued, what's going to happen here. But that's a very realistic depiction, because normally in, TV series, people commit an offence, get arrested, and the trial's like, a week later, just to keep the viewing figures up. But here, actually, there was quite a realistic timescale. But the thing is, he's got to serve those sentences concurrently at the same time. And that very much goes against the sentencing guidelines. Because, perverting the course of justice is given as a specific example of this should be a consecutive sentence. But what's the principle behind it? Well, the idea is that sentencing, we have this totality principle. However long you end up in prison should reflect the totality of your offending, however we calculate that. So it might be, well, we'll give you concurrent sentences, but we'll up them a little bit, or we'll give you consecutive sentences, but we'll reduce the sentences a bit, but get you to serve them back to back, and reach the same sort of, actual time you spend in prison. But generally speaking, concurrent sentences are where the offending all either arises out of the same offence. So, it could be something like, aggravated talk, dangerous driving, causing some other traffic offences. They say, well, that's all the same incident, so we'll just, whatever we sentence you for, you'll serve them all at the same time. Judges can actually just sentence you on what we call the index offence, the main offence, and then say no separate penalty on any of the others, just to sort of save time on that. Also, say for instance you are driving dangerously and you injure multiple people. Well, you get sentenced for each person you injured. But generally speaking, again, you will serve those sentences concurrently. However, the sentences will all be increased to take into account that actually you caused multiple injuries, because causing multiple injuries is one of the aggravating factors in the sentencing guidelines. One thing judges can't do is use consecutive sentence to bump up the sentencing beyond the statutory maximum. So when death for dangerous driving was the maximum of 10 years, it's gone up now, somebody was in, as the judge described, a motorised pub crawl and took out lots of people, and the judge there said, I am going to sentence each of the accidents as a separate thing and run them back to back to make sure you get a very long sentence. And the Court of Appeal said, we understand why you tried to do that, but you can't. Although, like I say now, Parliament has actually changed the law now, so the sentencing has been increased anyway. But with perverting the course of justice, the idea there is, well, yes, you've done an offence, you've committed an offence, so that we'll deal with all that. And you can have mixed consecutive and concurrent sentences. So say, for instance, we could say, we'll do you for the taking without consent. It's actually aggravated taking by consent because he damaged the car that he stole. So we'll do you for ag talk and dangerous driving. Those two sentences to be served concurrently. However, you then try to cover up your offending, and that sort of resets the clock. You know, this is a new pattern of offending now. So on the perverting the course of justice, we are going to sentence you in addition to that, because, you know, it's really strange, this. I mean, while you're under no duty to assist the police in catching you or prosecuting you, you are under a duty not to make it any harder for them. So say, for instance, you know, you go out and commit an assault and then you rush home and wash all your clothes in, you try to wash all your clothes, that would count. Incidentally, with traffic things, removing the SD card from your dash cam. Somebody has been actually convicted of that for perverting the course of justice, because they're in an accident and they just took the SD card out and binned it, and they said, well, no, because that would, you know, you did that to cover up, which is ironic because there's no duty to actually have a dash cam or have it turned on or anything like that. So it all gets very, very interesting. But yeah, in terms of accurate representation in the media, but for that sentencing element, they definitely seem to have consulted somebody, because they've got all the terminology wrong. I mean, things that really annoy us in, well, not annoy us, but things we always find amusing as lawyers watching TV. Judges in full bottomed wigs, the long ones, they never actually wear those in court, they only wear those on ceremonial occasions. Gavels, we don't use gavels, we've never used gavels in this country. Also, one of my personal bugbear is people talking about forensic evidence, because by definition, all evidence is forensic, because it means, forensic just means, you know, to be used in court proceedings. Although, having said that, even people who should know better, like SOCOs, because technically, you know, what most people call forensic evidence is, quote, scientific evidence, but you are now seeing people who should know better calling it forensic evidence as well. And I'll leave you on a little anecdote about accuracy in TV. There's a wonderful judge I used to appear in front of, a fellow Yorkshireman. I won't give his name out. All I'll say is he was Peter Sutcliffe's solicitor. Do your own Googling. But he was really nice, and he used to do a lot of stuff just in his room, like bail applications and things like that. You'd go in and say, oh, a cup of tea, Al? Oh, yeah, thank you. And in his room, he had 2 letters on the wall. And one was, there'd been a television programme about a court case, a fiction, but it was advertised as the most realistic depiction of court proceedings ever televised. And he'd written to, I think it was like the Yorkshire Evening Post, just gone, yes, I have to agree, I found it so realistic that 10 minutes into the prosecution case I was already asleep. And he's got that letter, and then he's got another letter up, which was from the Lord Chancellor's Department, saying, oh yeah, stop writing letters like that to the local press. It doesn't really reflect very well on the judiciary. But there you go. Hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely useful, vaguely accurate. And yeah, thank you to the people who asked me to cover this, and also, like I say, to the wonderful people at the All About the Archers YouTube channel. Go check them out if you do like things like that, because even if you don't, they're actually quite fascinating to watch. It's always interesting when you got to see somebody who's like clearly into a subject and really passionate about it, and just can articulate their passion very well. So yeah, go check them out.